can keep thinking about that. It is wonderful to have you all here today, and I love seeing your faces. We are going to, we'll just go over our norms really quickly there. I think those are pretty common. All right, so as we think about our learning focus to today, we're going to be getting into ways to improve the impact of your problem solving and data analysis processes. So it'll be, kind of going over the information, thinking about if there's pieces of those that you need to implement. You want to talk about getting started in your school, or if you already have things in school and you want to revisit those and think about how you might make them more impactful, kind of those two directions you can think about the content. We'll also go over components of an early warning system and think about how that whole student lens can really improve your processes. And I did want to give you a bit of a heads up. I didn't do this if you were with us earlier in the month, but we are going to have 2 short breakout sessions today. That's something that we like to do within our network to give you a chance to process information, get to know your colleagues, network a little bit. So I think one's 8 minutes and one's 7 minutes. They're pretty quick, focused mostly on the content, but really giving you a chance to put your camera on, put your microphone on, introduce yourselves to your colleagues, and just reflect and process the content a little bit. So I hope that you will take us up on those opportunities. All right, so let's get going here. So we're going to start with this quick quote. Spaghetti thinking prevents clarity, wastes time, and prevents productivity. I came across this while I was watching some videos by Sarah Ramsey. She was talking about that experience of being in a meeting when you're trying to talk about one thing and you're trying to get the conversation going. All of a sudden, people start talking around the problem. They start to avoid the topic and they throw all these other problems into the pile that prevents you from getting to real action or real solutions. And she talks about this as spaghetti thinking. When we get nervous or feel threatened with a difficult conversation, we sometimes begin to deflect by venting and overthinking. And that's what happens quite often, I think, in meetings, especially around the idea of data. Each of the ideas or what ifs people bring up are like these pieces of spaghetti, and it can become complex and tangled up pretty quickly. All right, we don't want to end up with piles of spaghetti during our data meetings. And we might avoid or reduce those times if we work to develop a strong data culture. So we're going to take just a minute before we get into the meat of the rest of the content and think about culture. What would you describe as the data culture in your district or schools? When no one's looking, what gets done? Data literacy, just knowing how to collect, analyze, and use data by itself isn't really sufficient to ensure data is used to guide instruction. This idea of a culture of data implies that data use practices happen when no one's looking. When data use becomes part of your culture, staff will be looking at and discussing data even between meetings. I always loved when teachers brought data to me and told me about things they discovered, when they were doing whatever it was they were doing. It always made me smile. Wrong direction here. Schools that are more effective at using data in a way that's ongoing and part of their culture ensure that all 5 of these elements of data use are consistent. We want to ensure data access and make sure that staff can make meaning from the data. We also need to clarify the expectations around data use and provide training and practice so staff can really build the knowledge and skills that are necessary. The 4 elements rest on leadership because without leadership, it's unlikely that data use will become part of the culture. Leaders building a culture of data use are with their teachers at trainings, as well as at analysis and planning meetings with teams. Quality data makes the work of analyzing and planning for student improvement much easier. We start with using multiple measures in order to tell the whole story. We look at demographic, student learning, perception, and school process data. The intersections of those different categories can help us begin to get answers to some really complex problems. When we think about data displays, we want them to be easily accessed and easily understood. When possible, having a data platform that allows you to look at multiple sources of data side by side can reduce frustration and help teams put all of the pieces together. And of course, we want our data to be accurate and timely. Finally, though I think this has become much more common in the last few years, I want to just put a quick reminder in to make sure you disaggregate your data into as many student groups as possible, thinking outside the norm of, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, those kinds of things. It's really the only way to ensure that we're equitably meeting the needs of all of our students. All right, so let's get into data. Often, problem-solving processes include versions of these 4 steps. Taking the time to support staff and developing a common understanding of your process and become fluent in it can really streamline problem-solving meetings and make them more impactful for students. One additional purpose for using a defined process is getting all staff involved and identifying the right problem, analyzing it well to get to the root cause, and then developing an actionable plan that relates the cause to the solution. This applies when a team is looking at district level, school level, department, or even grade levels. So I'd like to give you a chat question here really quickly. What is the state of problem solving in your buildings? Do you have a defined process for each level? Is it kind of hit and miss depending on the meeting or whether a certain person is or isn't present? How well are you using a defined problem-solving process now in your district? Kind of in the moment. Okay. Yeah, it's really hard to be consistent, not based on data. Admin decides. Developing. Okay, so perfect timing for you there. Developing our defined tier 1 problem-solving process. It's a tricky thing. It really is. So using a problem-solving process with fidelity enables a team to see how they're getting their current results before they jump to solutions and move from random acts of improvement to focused acts. When used consistently, the problem-solving cycle is a strategy for analyzing and eliminating gaps between school performance and goals. Whether a team uses the process for school improvement or individual students, we're asking questions and collecting data to answer those questions. We start by asking where we are now. This is the baseline. It's our current reality. Then we want to know how we got to where we are. This is the analysis phase where we think about what's happened, what the data are telling us, and even the root causes we hypothesize are behind the problem. Once we have that root cause identified, we move into plan development and ask how we're going to get to where we want to be. What actions do we need to take to meet our goal? Finally, after we've implemented the plan, we evaluate and determine if what we're doing is making a difference or if we need to make some changes. The first step is problem identification. Sometimes we know we have a need. Maybe it's 3rd grade math or behavior at the middle school. But sometimes we start a data review with an open mind and just look at data and see what we see. This often brings to light problems we don't even realize that we have. At this step, we want to identify what the problem is. We gather information to find out the current reality and current performance compared with what we would expect. This could be in academics, behavior, attendance, resource allocation, teacher evaluations, or a host of other things. We ask how the current data compares with the expectation and think about context and circumstances around the problem so we're able to dig down and find out the reasons why. Problem solving is more than just these 4 steps. It's the deeper conversation that gets us to a great plan. The next step is problem analysis. This is one that's often minimized or even skipped, but I think it's one of the most, if not the most important step. If we don't have the right problem and we don't know why the problem is happening, it's unlikely that the action steps we decide to put in place are going to lead to the outcomes and the impact that we're working toward. This step involves generating hypotheses, identifying root causes, and gathering information to confirm or rule out your hypothesis. If we're working on a student issue, we have to think about whether it's a can't do or a won't do problem. If we have a teacher or an outcome concern, or maybe a budget problem, We might want to know about curriculum, instruction, or the learning environment to best align our plan to the need. Problem analysis is crucial, yet frequently overlooked. Time spent analyzing a problem through gathering information will help teams make sound, defensible decisions, leading to implementation of a well-designed plan that'll have a greater likelihood of success. As we start to consider how problem solving looks at the district or school level, it's important to include multiple measures of data in the problem identification and problem analysis steps of the process. Dr. Victoria Bernhardt suggests gathering these 4 types of data to provide a more complete picture of your school situation. And as you answer the questions of where are we now and how did we get here, Bernhardt recommends that we look at these different types of data and that we consider the intersections of those types, the overlapped areas in this Venn diagram. For example, if we look at demographic data, say ethnicity, and look at perception data together, we get a better view of how school looks and feels for different ethnic groups. This graphic is one that we developed to help schools plan for data meetings and organize their thoughts about making sure they have representation for each of the 4 categories. When we use the problem-solving process at the district or school level, our teams are engaging in continuous improvement. We look at our data and hopefully multiple measures to identify what the problem is. We look at strengths and challenges of the data. What do they reveal about where we are and how we got to be here? Dr. Bernhardt recommends we do this for each of the 4 types of data. This form on the left provides a simple format for the process. It's called the Atlas Protocol, and you can find it on the internet pretty easily. Once we identify the problem at the school level, then the team generates hypotheses as to why it's occurring. Again, Bernhardt recommends the team generate multiple potential hypotheses. The image on the right is a form for 20 reasons why. The idea here is that by continuing to ask why, we pass by the emotional responses and the things that are out of the school's control. It's the responses towards the end of the process that are most likely and most actionable. And it's important to remember that our hypothesis has to be something that's changeable, something we can influence with our actions. Once we have those potential hypotheses, we need to decide if we have the data to refute them or if we need to gather something additional to help us answer the questions. When we think about problem analysis at Tier 1, we're really focusing on the entire classroom, those big grade level or content area groups. And as we review data at these levels, we want to see how close we are to that goal. It's a tough one, of having 80% of our students at benchmark. If we don't have that percentage, we need to ask ourselves why students aren't reaching benchmark. Does it have something to do with the curriculum, the instruction, or the environment in our classrooms or buildings that's keeping students from being successful? I know it's really hard not to get frustrated when percentages of student at grade levels or at expected levels are low, and staff tend to want to just move on and provide interventions. But that's not going to solve the problem. We have to do the hard work of improving the core to meet the needs of as close to 80% of students as possible. Using the problem-solving process at Tier 1 can help us analyze and dig into data, finding out why some students are growing and why others are not. Part of figuring that out is looking at data by student groups. Disaggregating will really help us get the most important information so we can make the best decisions. I recommend looking beyond just the race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status and whether a student has an IEP or 504. Take a look sometime at your attendance by student group, behavior, engagement in school groups or clubs, the connection with others on campus. Another really important and often overlooked piece of MTSS is fidelity. Having conversations around what's expected in the areas of curriculum, assessment, instruction, and school processes can go a long way toward meeting the 80% at benchmark level. But don't just have conversations. Put some fidelity checks in place, and as they say, inspect what you expect. Finally, within all of the levels of problem solving and continuous improvement, we always make new goals and evaluate growth to ensure that we're on the right track. Problem analysis at tier 2 then brings the focus to the intervention group. Here we're thinking about the students who are participating in a particular small group activity, which of course, because it's tier 2, is aligned and in addition to the core. At tier 2, we're thinking about the goal of having 70% of students within a small group showing sufficient growth. The amount of growth that's sufficient is kind of predetermined within the program, your decision rules, your intervention plan, and your goal for the student to reach. It can change based on what the program or activity the students are involved in. Again, we're going to be looking at if there's growth or not enough growth, and why that might be as part of our problem analysis. I encourage you always to graph your data as much as possible, but particularly at tier 2 and tier 3. When we're thinking about movement, either back to tier 1 or up to tier 3, it's important to have progress monitoring data graphed to visually represent what's happening for the team, the student, and even the family. This helps us know whether we should stop, start, or change an intervention based on that predetermined decision rules or guidelines that you have in place, that goal you expect students to reach. And we need fidelity of the plan that we put in place. When we get to tier 3, we're starting to focus on individual students. We'll start prioritizing our concerns because if a student's receiving tier 3 support, they most likely have more than one area that we want to see improvement in. We think about the one skill that's going to make the biggest difference the fastest. Again, we would look at root causes. The intensity of the need at tier 3 often requires us to gather additional information in order to develop the most impactful plan. There are two tools or resources I think that really help with this. The first is RIOT. This acronym gives us guidance on how to get additional information. We might review test results or documents, interview the family, student, teacher, or others who have knowledge of the student. We'd observe the student in a few school environments or do additional diagnostic testing. The second tool is the ISIL. This helps us remember to consider the 4 domains that impact learning. We really consider instruction, the curriculum, the classroom environment as reasons a student might be struggling. If those areas don't provide answers, we might start to think about things connected to the student. The important part here is that we don't jump right to the issue being with the student. We want our tier 3 plans to be very closely related to the specific need of the students. We wouldn't want to develop a general plan around increasing vocabulary behavior. We'd want to include the type of vocabulary or a process for practicing. We would list specific high leverage behavior skills to work on and specific strategies to engage students, really aligning as closely down and specifically as we can. We'll have more frequent progress monitoring in this level, usually weekly, if not multiple times a week, depending on what the intervention is and how sensitive it is to change. And we want to make sure the team is reviewing data frequently and altering the plan as appropriate. The goal at tier 3 is to provide intensive intervention that's enough to close the gap between current performance and the benchmark. That takes time and attention, sometimes a lot, which I'm sure you've all experienced. Before we leave problem analysis, I'd like to introduce you or reintroduce you to the work of Dr. Marquita Newell. She's done her work around culturally responsive problem solving, and I think it fits really well here within problem analysis. You can watch Dr. Newell's videos on YouTube just by searching her and culturally responsive problem solving. She talks about 2 strategies for culturally responsive problem solving, getting it done. The first is to reframe deficit-based thinking. In conversations about students, we want to avoid any kind of reason or excuse that comes up involving facts that are unfounded. These are things that have absolutely no evidence of being the case. It might include opinions, feelings, or intuition staff have about students and their families. Things like parents don't care. Unless the parents have specifically told you that, it's not something we want to assume and consider. She also talks about reframing facts that are untrue. If you have no data to back up a causal relationship between who a person is and their need, we can't use it as a basis for our plan. The example she uses is around Black students being innately more violent. There isn't any data to support that children with dark skin are violent. It's just untrue. There may be data about students in certain life situations who may happen to be Black and display violence, but they aren't violent because they're Black. She also talks about unalterable facts. This is becoming more common in schools. We should only talk about things that we can change or alter as part of our plan for students. We can't alter the fact that a student's parents are incarcerated or that they live in poverty. So we don't use those as reasons not to help students. We think about the factors we can change and make a plan to impact those things. The second strategy is the need to identify a low inference hypothesis for our intervention plan. Dr. Newell defines how inference is being low inference as being factors we can see, measure, and link to the problem. Whereas high inference hypotheses are things inside a person that we'd have to infer or guess about and likely can't change. So how might implementing these two problem-solving strategies increase the effectiveness and equity in your conversations? We'll take a break here and think about, you could put something into chat. How might using these two strategies increase the equity and effectiveness of your conversations?
I'm just going to come off for a minute, just as opposed to having to type it all.
Sure.
I think what really struck me was the, getting to the why beyond the emotional reaction, the initial sort of like blaming it on all these things we can't control. So I feel like having a process for doing that and like just getting past that part would be excellent.
Yeah. It takes some time, and there's that awkward silence as people are trying to dig down to the whys. But if you can get down there, you're like, we never thought about that before. That's something we can do. And then, everybody feels relieved.
Yeah, and,
Right.
and to add value to that, I would think that it's a shift in our lens and how we see the structures, the students, the behaviors, and creating a different mindset for which we approach these issues or problems at each tier.
Yeah.
And then, as opposed to spending our time admiring what those problems are, shifting the way that we communicate or our culture of communication to that of being solution-based.
Yes.
And by looking at, reframing the deficit-based and what Dr. Newell's talking about, that can serve as a new foundation for that shift.
Yeah. She spends some time in the videos really giving you talking points in meetings. When something is said that kind of goes against these guidelines, she gives you the words to say, the action. So it's great if you've got time to watch those videos. Thank you for that. All right, so these strategies can have a really big impact on problem-solving conversations and the kinds of plans and even expectations we have around supporting students. So if you have a chance to take a look at her videos, I think you'll find it worth the time. I think they're about an hour. There's two, and I think they total about an hour. All right, the complexity of Tier 3 challenges often leads to ongoing problem-solving conversations and frequent revision of plans in order to find that magic set of circumstances that'll lead to success for students. In particularly challenging cases, it's sometimes difficult to think about what we might change within a plan in order to increase the likelihood of success. There are 7 dimensions here on the slide that you can think about when you're changing to improve outcomes. They're included in the taxonomy of intervention intensity from the National Center on Intensive Intervention. The first dimension, strength, is how well the program works for students with intensive needs. Dosage is the number of opportunities the student has to receive corrective feedback and how frequently those interventions occur. Alignment covers how well an intervention meets the student's specific and intensive needs. In attention to transfer, we're considering how well students are able to take the skills from the intervention and apply them back with their regular classwork. Comprehensiveness includes the number of explicit instruction principles that an intervention incorporates. Behavior support talks about how well the program incorporates self-regulation and executive functioning. And the last dimension, individualization, involves how we might be able to change the intervention to meet the student's needs. And I do wanted to point out really quickly as well that there's an academic and kind of a behavior version of this if you go to the intensive intervention website and look at those. So it gives you a little bit of differentiation there. So teams can consider each of these dimensions for those small shifts in an intervention plan. I said before, Tier 3 is intensive, and the process of finding the right combination of the 7 dimensions takes time. Now that we have some ideas for what it takes to identify and analyze the problem, the next step is to develop our plan. The purpose of plan development is to select and implement a system, support, or intervention that's focused on what to teach, how best to teach it, and then how to monitor progress. Thinking about this another way, what's the simplest thing we can do that will have the greatest impact? We need to consider how well the activities align to student need, the logistics of implementation, as well as how we monitor progress and fidelity. And then the last step of the problem-solving process is evaluation. This is where we take a deeper look to see if something is working. We ask the questions: did our plan work? How do we know? Have our outcomes improved? What are our next steps? The purpose of evaluation is to determine the effectiveness or impact of the plan based on the data we've collected. The team will determine if what is being done is making a difference and resulting in improved outcomes. If the plan's working, activities can be faded or discontinued. But if not, the plan needs to be reevaluated and the problem-solving process revisited. And this is another one of those steps that's often overlooked. We don't have time, we don't think about it, we've got so many things to move on to. But really taking the time to evaluate if your plan worked is going to get you to a better place in the end. All right. When we think about evaluating the tiers of instruction, there are 4 questions we'd like to try and answer. First, is our core curriculum adequately supporting students? This gets to the idea of how close we are to that 80% goal. How strong is our instruction? We think about things like, is our instruction systematic and explicit? Is it differentiated? We might ask how flexible grouping is handled or how active student engagement is in lessons. We want to know the reality of classroom behavior. The second question to ask is if the core is supporting students equitably. We find that out by looking at our disaggregated data and thinking about how student groups compare to other student groups. The third question to ask when evaluating the tiers is, what's the quality of Tier 2 and Tier 3 level support? Are more students moving to a lower tier than to a more intensive one? We're thinking about what the evidence level is of our interventions and if teachers are aligning the interventions to the skills of the students. We'd look for impact to tell us how well teachers are trained and delivering the selected interventions. And we need to know if the interventions are being delivered for an adequate amount of time and with fidelity. Finally, we arrive at what's next, keeping the continuous improvement cycle in mind. I'm going to keep sliding that idea of fidelity in because that could be a whole nother webinar. Since we want to evaluate at all the tiers, we additionally think about the big picture. We look at student outcome data, those big picture sources like end of class or summative state data. We'd include disaggregated student demographic, attendance, mobility, and IEP data. This allows us to do a gap analysis and check in on our progress towards serving students equitably. I'd include perceptions of our stakeholders, parents, students, staff, as we think about evaluating for success. In order for us to know if our plan is working, if our systems and processes are supporting student outcomes the way we want them to, evaluation is a must. To evaluate effectively, we prioritize what data we're going to collect, thinking about which sources we can leverage for the best outcomes. To be efficient, we think about the methods and procedures for gathering data, how we're going to analyze it, and what we're going to do with the data to move us closer to our district and school goals. All right, so here is that first breakout that I mentioned. So we're going to give you an opportunity to work with some colleagues in a small group. He invites you to put your camera on, get your voice in the room, introduce yourselves, kind of talk about maybe a little bit of what your situation is, where you are, and then think about the questions here. What's rolling around in your mind about data analysis? You can talk about your school's current reality, how the resources might help you level up your support, or whatever else is hot on your mind today. So you'll have about 8 minutes. You can choose a room, and we will see you back. All right. We have a, my mind just went totally blank. Something that you would like to share perhaps from the breakout, you can put it into chat. I think we'll keep going for time purposes here, but we would definitely be interested in hearing what your thoughts were from chat if you would like to share those with us. All right, so moving on to early warning systems. It really allows us to see that whole student because we're looking at a lot of different kinds of data side by side in ways that maybe we don't usually do. So typically, early warning system indicators fall into these categories: attendance, behavior, and course completion. When researchers looked at student data and enrollment status, they found that gender, race, age, and even test scores didn't have the predictive power of attendance and course failures. They learned that high school students missing more than 10% of school is significant, and that those who miss more than 10% of the first 20 days are at particular risk for dropout. This research is behind the work of Attendance Works. I mentioned them at our attendance webinar earlier this month. So please check out their website if you haven't had a chance before. Here are some statistics about the predictability for dropping out around freshman course failures. Research shows that 85% of students with no semester failures during freshman year went on to graduate in 4 years, while only 70% of students with 1 semester F during 9th grade graduated in 4 years. Students with 2 semester Fs in 9th grade, only 55% graduated in 4 years. And finally, freshman students with 3 or more semester Fs are likely to not graduate from high school at all. Wow. So an early warning system can help with that because we use data to identify students who are exhibiting behavior or academic performance, which puts them at risk for dropping out of school. They're most frequently used at middle and high school level, but can also be very helpful to those in elementary schools. Some of the benefits of using an early warning system are that it utilizes readily available data, which should be easy for everyone to access. Looking at a variety of indicators can help ask questions that will identify patterns and root causes, pointing us in a direction to better support students. Some high schools are even using their early warning system to replace screeners and feel it gives a better understanding of student performance and likelihood of graduating than your typical academic or SEL assessments. They also use data that's been shown through research to be highly predictive in identifying student need. And this focused data allows for the targeting of interventions for the whole child because we're looking at all of those big buckets: the academic, behavior, or engagement, and attendance indicators. While early warning systems are typically used at the middle and high school levels, the identifiable pathways are often seen much sooner. For instance, Sarah Sparks in 2013 found that up to 75% of students with math and reading skills below grade level are at an increased risk of dropping out. Her research also showed that first grade students with GPAs at or below 1.2 by the spring semester are at risk. Lack of success at first grade predicts dropping out of high school. At the 6th grade level, failing grades in math, reading, or both are significant signs that a student will drop out before graduation. And by 9th grade, the criteria are less specific, but still state that 2 or more failed courses, a GPA below 2.0, and not having enough credits to move on to 10th grade indicate an elevated risk for dropping out. These are really powerful statistics. I put some of the research citations on the slide there for you if you'd like to check those out. So let's take a look at this graphic. A student who often finds success believes they have access to more teacher and peer support, so they participate more. The more they participate, the more they feel connected with school. And this leads them to being more engaged, which then, of course, brings more success. Opportunities for participation change as students progress through the educational system. In elementary school, successful participation might involve attending school and joining in on activities in class. But as students get older, participation requires greater effort. There's more homework, there's more outside projects. There are also more opportunities to participate in non-academic aspects of school, like band, clubs, or other extracurricular activities. For students who are struggling or at risk for dropping out, this cycle starts to break down. As they experience frustration, they're less likely to show the increasing and varied forms of participation at school. When they don't participate, they're often less successful and experience reduced feelings of belonging, which can lead them to disengage even more. Early warning system data helps us identify students who are beginning to disengage so that we can intervene early. So here's a high school example of an early warning system. You can see the indicators in the gray box represent the three areas of attendance, grades, and behavior in SEL. Notice there are criteria attached to each of the risk factors. Failing 1 grade per month or having 5 or more tardies to first hour. These specifics were included by the school who developed this example based on their needs. Your school may have different needs that you feel indicate risk for your students. You can also see around the graphic as well how many risk factors would indicate support at each of the tiers. And here's a similar example at elementary school. The risk factors are different because, again, it was created by their school for their students. So you'll have to think about what you would consider to be important for your students. All right, since we're so tight on time today, I put together this slide to help you get started with an early warning system. The first thing you'd want to do is establish your team, thinking about the stakeholders who need to be involved, who has the decision-making authority, who has access to the data. The second thing you'd want to do is identify your indicators in the 3 big buckets of attendance, behavior, and courses, thinking about your cut scores as well as you develop each tier. Next, you have to think about where you're going to hold your data. This is easy for those of you who have a data platform, but if you don't have one of those, how are you going to make or identify reports for your data conversations? Step 4 is for thinking about the interventions and logistics around what you can offer. Think through the when, how, who, and what, all of the things that go into interventions. And finally, you'll have to think about a plan to evaluate your progress and effectiveness. It's not going to be perfect the first time. So by evaluating and looking at where your strengths and areas for growth are, you can make adjustments and continue to improve your process. We'll put a link in chat for an article that gives more laid out information on this. Okay, we're going to take a few minutes here for a second breakout, thinking about how this conversation might help with your data analysis work around problem solving in an early warning system. We'll take about 7 minutes. Again, we invite you to meet with your colleagues and discuss. We'll see you back in 7. All right, welcome back, everyone. So how did that conversation go? What were the big highlights or the ahas? Anybody want to share anything this time?
I think one of the things for me was I had Tara and Maureen in my group, and we have very different realities as far as student population goes as numbers. You know, Maureen's from Rockford and Tara is from, I forget, not Janesville. Where are you from again? Knoxville, Illinois. There's a Knoxville, Illinois, you guys. Did you know that? I didn't know that. Something I learned today. Something I didn't know I was going to be learning. I thought it was going to be all about data, but and she's from a very small district. I think she said they had how many students? K-12?
1,000.
1,000 students, K-12. But we are all in the same place as far as you know, we collect, we're in this profession, we're great data collectors. We're wonderful at, we have a plethora of data at our fingertips, but it's like, what do we do with it then?
Right.
And Rockford has a very robust program in place, and they do have a, you know, they do have the early warning system already in place, but it's still like making those determinations, you know, and before we collect more data, what data do we already have and what do we do with it? So even though we
Absolutely.
have different realities from different places, it seems to be that the data is, the issues with the data are very similar.
Interesting. Always interesting. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Kate. All right. Anybody else? You can put it on into chat there if you'd like to. Okay, so we're mostly at the end, but I did want to share this little bit of thought here around data analysis and the fact that problem solving is a process. Really, we can't get tied up in our failures, but we definitely want to celebrate our successes and remember that it's really the courage to continue that counts. We can't give up. We just keep going and celebrate the little progress that we're making and let go of the things that aren't working for us. Continuous improvement, right? We just keep getting better. We have to keep moving forward because our students are worth it and we are worth it for each other to support and move together as a group. All right. I shared this earlier in the month, but for those of you who might not have been with us then, we are teaming up with NIU STEAM and putting on a conference in Aurora on June 7th. We'll be talking about literacy, STEAM, MTSS, all of those things kind of together, and separately we'll have breakouts. We also have a keynote group coming from ISB talking about collaborating for success for students in STEAM. We'll have people from the literacy department, science, and math to help us celebrate and learn together. You can register at our website. The link is there on the page. And we have, even though my slide says April 30th, we've extended that $50 discount to May 30th. So you do have through May 30th to register and get that discount. Hope you can join us there. Okay, so there we are. I thought we were going to be over and we are a couple of minutes early, so I'm sure everybody will enjoy that. Please reach out if you have any questions. Lori and I always enjoy working with everyone and listening to their ahas and share the stories. So thank you for joining us, and we hope that we will see you in another situation, another venue at another time. Have a great day, have a great month, have a great summer, and everybody take care. Bye-bye.